So let's go on with the program. Let me introduce Jim Grisanzio, who's been with the OpenSolaris project since the beginning and who knows everything about it. So Jim is now building the community internationally. I don't know if I said it correctly, but Jim, please correct me and introduce yourself and do all the necessary stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate it. Obviously, I'm Jim Grisanzio, and been involved in the project at Sun since the very beginning, which is over 4 years now. I was on the original project team that was charged to actually to start the whole program at OpenSolaris. And we grew very, very large, and then we grew very small, and then we were actually growing large again. And our team basically now is the infrastructure team. And so that's the website and all the infrastructure that is really necessary for running the project. And I used to be the community manager in the project, and now my role is a little bit more global, focused much more on engineering and project management. And also just a few months ago, elected to the OGB. So taking much more of a governance role now, and to me that's global, and to me that also focuses on how you get people involved in the project. My voice is a little scratchy here, so I'm actually have to drink here. Because thanks to the Sun globalization team that kept me out very late last night and forced me to drink large amounts of alcohol. And tired and did a lot of talking, so I hope to get through this okay. So, how do you get involved with OpenSolaris? This is a governance issue. This really is a community development issue. And this first image here is from Nanjing in China. Has anybody been to China here? I know you've been to China. We have anybody from China here? No? Okay. Get on a plane and go to China and visit the universities. It'll blow your mind. It's a really, really cool experience. That enthusiasm is overwhelming. I mean, I was going to university one time actually in Shanghai. I was with some Sun people who were in the UCAD, and I asked them, so how many of your kids would be there? And they said, 200 or 300. And I said, 200 or 300 kids? Oh my God, on USC standards, that's a lot. He said, oh, that's nothing. Last week we had to stop the buses. I said, you shipped them in by the busload? I mean, this really is an extraordinary amount of people who are involved in these engineering programs in China now. And 4 years ago when I first went, I noticed that these kids, their English wasn't that good, and they were more shy. Now, this is just, like actually last year, they're not so shy anymore. Their English has actually improved substantially in just a few years. They're asking questions and they're questioning your answers. It's really, really an extraordinary experience. I know a lot of companies have operations there now, so if you haven't been, you should go. It's absolutely very, very cool. So, first thing I want to start off with here is congratulations, and I mean this in all sincerity. This conference was the first conference the first community-generating conference in the OpenSolaris project. On the project team a few years ago, we were sitting in the office, we were sitting around, and somebody from Germany, Dirk, I think it was, I'm not sure, somebody sent a mail to the OpenSolaris lists and said, we're going to have a conference. We're going to have a conference in Berlin. I think it was you, right? Yeah. And he sends this mail. I had never seen him or heard of him. Who are you, right? And we're sitting in this meeting. I get this mail, and it's like OpenSolaris Developer Conference, such and such in Berlin. Who are you guys? Just out of the blue. We were actually planning to do this, from the Sun side, and you beat us to it, and it was great. But it also was a wake-up for us that the community can grow organically. So that's a huge congratulations, and now this is obviously the second year. I was there last year as well. So cool, congratulations on your second year. So that is me 20 years ago, which is a long time ago, when I was young and strong. I just wanted to give you a little bit of history about who I am and where I come from, because it pervades everything I do. You can read examples in my blog, you can hear it in my speech, it just pervades everything. I used to be in the construction business. I used to run that machine there. There was a Cat 953 track loader. It was a 15-ton machine, fully hydraulic. It was extremely innovative 20 years ago. It was jet fast, for a machine that size. I learned about community building then, actually, because I had competitors, I had employees. I worked with contractors and builders on this. Is in New York. And I learned all about when a competitor is in trouble, when a machine is in trouble, or sinking in the mud, or something like that, and he calls you, you go, even though you compete. So I learned all about how to help people in a business situation, and how you can actually have a community environment, even in the construction business. It was a very difficult business, but it taught me a lot of early lessons about, I was called a developer. Now in this business here, I'm not called a developer because I'm not an engineer, but I actually am a developer because that was my name then. And so I went from construction to software, and I don't know if you've read anything from Doc Searles from the Untitled Chapter manifesto, but he actually has written fairly extensively, because he also came from the construction business. And he's written about how the language of construction really is similar to the language of software. You have specifications, you have projects, you have tools, things like that. A lot of the language is very, very similar. So, sometimes I get a little insecure that I'm not an engineer, but I actually am a developer. So that's my little speech there. Fast forward, 20 years, I moved from New York to Boston, to San Francisco, and I kept going west, and I moved to Japan, which is where I live now. And I live in Tokyo, which is, but you know where Tokyo is there.
Did you take that photo?
That's Dave Stewart from Intel right there. No, actually I took that from Wikipedia, but it's free. But that's a very cool photo, and I actually stretched it to make it look a little bit more weird, because Japan is a very, very strange place. And the point to this is, I live here now, I'm not just visiting. I've been there for 2 years. And when I left California, I was working in the center of the OpenSolaris project, with all the main engineers and all the executives from Sun and everything. And I moved to Japan, and I discovered what it's like to be in the community, in the sense that you're far away, and especially in Japan. Japan has significant cultural and language barriers. All of East Asia has that. And so getting information is challenging, and working across a lot of these language barriers is obviously very, very challenging. And Sun in Japan is also very different. There's 1,000 employees there. There are 3 of me. 3. And so when I look around, I don't see a lot of English-speaking people there. And so my connections for this project are global. And so as a result, I'm always on the end of a phone, or the end of an email, or a conference call, or something like that. Basically a thin pipe. And when I left California, I really realized that a lot of the complaints from the community about lack of transparency and lack of openness and stuff were true. But that's true inside of Sun as well. And so for those of you who aren't Sun employees, you have to realize that we struggle with the very same things that you do many times. This is a huge, huge lesson for me. Also, it's a gigantic market in Tokyo. It's a huge, huge market. It's the 2nd largest market for Solaris in the world. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and there are actually some very, very interesting things happening in Japan with the Sun new customer base. This is me practicing. So everything here is all photographs. Okay. This is me practicing my international relations skills, because really that's what I do now. I do global community building, and the gentleman on the left here was the first one I introduced myself to that. This is actually at in IUZU University, which is an international university in Japan, which is kind of rare. And secondly, over 50% of the faculty are non-Japanese, which again is extremely rare. I was doing a talk there, and a gentleman on the left, walked up to me, introduced, so he handed me his card. I took the card and introduced myself. I said, "Hajime and I said, "Jim Des," and I said, "Yoshikyo onegaishimasu," which means essentially, "Hi, how are you doing? I'm Jim." And he said to me, "Nihongo jouzu desu," which means, "Oh, you speak really good English." And he said that in Japanese, and then he introduced himself in perfect English. He said, I'm Professor Lee Park. I'm from Korea." And I said, "Oh, I feel like an idiot because you can see him holding his card there. And I can read Korean. I know what Korean looks like. And I should have known he's not Japanese. But I'm in Japan, it's multi-Japanese." And then the other professor walked up and did the same thing, introduced myself in Japanese. He responded in Japanese. He said, "Oh, I speak really Japanese really well." I said, "No, I don't, blah, blah, blah." And then he said, "I'm Professor Lee. I'm from China." This is really embarrassing. These guys, my assumptions were completely wrong. Totally wrong. But I should have known because he gave me his card and I know what Chinese looks like. I should have realized. But the point here is, as I'm learning international relations, so too are we in the OpenSolaris project. When we started the project, we really didn't have a sense of globalness. Everything was in English. All the developers were in California. And we really struggled with sort of understanding how this would grow globally. Quite frankly, we didn't really have a lot of resources to even consider a lot of these things. We knew it would be on the roadmap. Obviously, it was there, but we launched with a very California-oriented project. That's all changing now. And as you can see me struggling through it myself, a lot of us are too. That's a very interesting university, by the way, for a Japanese university. A lot of international students there. For Japan, it's a very enthusiastic school. Sort of like the first image from China. The kids are really, really interested in interacting. Has anybody been to Japan here? Dave has too, I said. Okay, have you been on the Shinkansen? Yeah. Okay. One of the, obviously I lived there, so I'm on the Shinkansen all the time. One of the things you notice in the Shinkansen is it's fast, it's clean, it's on time. And the main image there is blurry. Obviously the train's blurry because it's going through the station at speed, which is, if you haven't seen one, it's basically like watching Indy 500 or Formula One. It's 200 miles an hour through the station. In this image here, I didn't see the train, so the train was coming up from me, behind me. I didn't hear it until it was right on me, and I grabbed the camera and I shot. So it flew a bit blurry here. But the point here is these trains are fast and on time, and this is not actually how OpenSolaris is evolving. Okay, OpenSolaris is evolving in a slightly different way. The analogy is not perfect, it's close enough, but because some things actually are moving fast now. But it hasn't been clean in the sense that we've done a lot of work over here, we left this stuff over there, and we did this stuff over here, we left that over there. Which is kind of natural because we were opening the project from inside of the company. And we've had to grab resources wherever we could and things like that. So it hasn't been a steady sort of progression. That's what I mean by clean. And on time, certainly, some things have been on time, but I think we've been late on a lot of things. And again, you have to cut slack a little bit. We have to cut a little bit of slack here because the strategy has to change a little bit, in different areas, and you have to sort of allow for. Nobody has done this. Corporation of Sun's size. I mean, if you can name a company that's opened its 3 core products, which is what Sun has done. So some things are going to be late, and so that's the whole point there. And if you go to Japan, this is really a kick. it's really, if you're lucky enough to be standing in the station when a train goes through at speed, have your camera ready. Because you only have a second. It takes 1 second for it to go through. This is more how OpenSolaris is evolving in my mind. So, actually, the guy here in the corner is Bill Dan. This is in Sausalito, California. I sat there and I took pictures of this guy for an hour. He's very, very shy. He didn't speak to me because I asked him how he actually does this. But I just observed him. And he takes a rock, and those rocks are heavy. I couldn't even lift with some of those. And he picks it up and he places it. And he just holds it. He doesn't, move it like this. He just holds it in place until he finds the center of gravity, and then he releases. And it's standing. And it's windy. Sausalito, California is windy. And it's standing solidly. And to me, this, when you look at a lot of the engineers, the Solaris engineers who've been thinking about OpenSolaris for years now, this is what they want, in the sense that we want to be able to get things in place for long-term growth and balance. So it stands, very interesting concept here. And actually, he goes there every single weekend. So if you're in Sausalito, just stop by. His name's Bill Dan. As we grow, as we have been growing in the OpenSolaris community, we have taken some criticism, I think, for being inorganic. And so this image is from Kijima in Japan. It's obviously a sunflower, and I think it would work for sun of Solaris. And it's obviously organic. And some of the criticisms of the OpenSolaris project, that it's an inorganic project, are true. But I would argue that there's nothing wrong with that. And obviously, the comparison is always with Linux. And Linux, started out, organically, and it has remained organic all along. I would question that assertion, but again, I don't particularly care about the issue. The point I want to drive home is that sometimes people, when they complain that sun is inorganic, this project is organic, it's too managed. There's a reason for that. There's a real core reason for that. Is when the sun is opening Solaris, it's opening up tens of millions of lines of source code, and thousands of engineers, and lots of infrastructure. But it's also shipping products to customers around the world and supporting those products and deriving revenue from those systems. And so we have to open this whole thing in a stepped process, and that will look to the outsider as being heavily managed. Now, we've also made some mistakes on the project that exacerbate this to make it look like we're really, really heavily managed, and we can obviously get into that. But there are also things on Solaris that are purely organic. This conference is one of them. As I said, you guys just showed up out of nowhere. We didn't even know you existed a couple of years ago. A lot of the user groups are completely organic. Some of them are started by some people in the field, but a lot of them just showed up. Here we are in Singapore, or in Shanghai, or wherever. The ports of D-Trace and ZFS over to Mac OS and to BSD, it was completely organic. Sun wasn't involved in that. After I'm sure engineers were involved after it got started, but again, it just happened as a result of having the code open. We wanted, when we designed the project early on, we wanted the inorganic things to happen. The distributions were inorganic. Were organic. Ours was organic, but the other ones were it came from the community. And so I think the goal here is to get more things from the community that aren't necessarily crafted from Sun. But anyway, so it's a combination of both. Here. Just a quick project profile here. This is an image from Japan. This is the first time we did an OpenSolaris event in Tokyo, and it's about 300 people that showed up, and they stayed for hours. What you'll notice here, it's all guys, and they tend to be older. This is really not the community, this really is the market. This traditional Solaris market in Tokyo. We hold other events in Tokyo where we get a lot of younger people, and it's not necessarily in a speech-like environment, like that. But what impressed me about this is there was very little sort of outreach on our part. This was the first one, and we got hundreds of people. I expected, actually, but because of the size of the Tokyo market, but it was very, very encouraging. Your communication in Japan, a lot of the times, is very, very mysterious. I was, with some people, I was asking them, have you sent this stuff out? Have you done this? Have you done this? Oh yeah, everything's fine. So I didn't, see a lot of it, and then 300 people show up. But so the community is, in terms of, just to go a couple of project items, who will wear one of my hat, all this. Who is Sun? The community is Sun. It's Sun customers and partners, really anybody involved in Solaris. That's how we started this. They're all a part of the community. They all have, some of them have business relationships with Sun, obviously, but that doesn't matter because we are literally transforming a market into a community. What is on the project is source, binaries, and people, really. And the point there is we started out as a source community, and it's caused a great deal of confusion early on because people thought that we had a distro initially. We wanted it, but we really started off as a source community because we had to open things in stages. Where? It started in California. That's very, very clear. Now it's global, certainly. When is in 2005. But we were working on this for a year before, so it goes back to 2004. Why? It's in that picture there, the community. We want to build a developer community. Initially, it was focused around kernel developers, system administrators, and those guys. Now it's grown and expanded much more to include users, application developers, and other kinds of developers. But the concept of having a user community now is absolutely huge, and that's one of the priorities. How is, that's actually, I feel, a strategy, is open communications and open development. You cannot build a community from behind the firewall. It's not possible. You must work in the open. And this is the one message after 4 years, the one thing I've learned. If you're working internally, I tell this to some people all the time, if you have internal lists, people on the outside have no idea what you're talking about. They can't see it. And I have the analogy of myself moving over to Japan and not having hallway conversations with people in Menlo Park. It's a big deal. If you're working on internal lists, you are invisible. You got to get outside, and that's the open work, working in the open and communicating in the open. And that really is the strategy for building community. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. Priorities in the project, for right now, anyway, certainly the movement of the infrastructure outside is an absolute priority. The redesign and update of the website is a priority. The Indiana distribution is a priority from an engineering perspective and also a user perspective. We didn't have that initially, so that's new. We focused, the priorities initially to get the source open. Now it's to get the infrastructure open. So the priorities have been changed recently. And this is a little bit of community profile. I love this image because Blicky looks like a gangster here, and John looks like this lawyer. So this was actually shot, and these are great guys, but this is actually shot in, actually is Michael here? I thought he was going to come. Huh? Oh, he couldn't make it? Okay. This is actually my favorite image from the OpenSolaris Developer Summit in California, I guess a couple of months ago now. And I don't think they represent the whole community, but I just love the image. But the community is global now. We have 70 or so user groups. There are over 250 projects. There are 40 community groups. The site now. Over 200, almost 300 lists at this point. There's about 12,000 people who are subscribed to those lists and having conversations. The web forum views are 60, 80 million. You know, I mean, it's huge now. Some of the traffic that the site is generating is getting interesting. It's getting into tens of millions of views, and much more from China, much more from India, even a lot of traffic from Japan. In fact, Japan is, for as quiet as it is on the lists, Japan generates its massive amount of traffic into OpenSolaris.org and to a lot of the forums. So the Japanese are there, they're just sometimes a little quiet. And so as I said before, we started out with kernel developers and kind of high-end people, and you look at someone like me, and I'm a program manager, right? I'm not an engineer, so for me, working with the earlier versions of Solaris that we opened was very tough because installing it and things, I had to go find engineers and stuff. So we're really reaching out to now people like me, and people who are just in the business, and people who know a lot about computers but aren't necessarily engineers. And so it's becoming easier for people like me to actually get involved now in the project. This is actually the goal. I think this is actually the goal. The reason I put the images small, it's about 250 images here, because we don't just want small amounts, we want large amounts. If Sun is going to build markets, it has to have large user base. And so that's how I represented here with a lot of these images. These images are all from FOSS, India, and Bangalore, and also here last year at this conference. I chose these two. I have thousands from which to choose, by the way, so I chose these two conferences because, to me, they represent more of the style of conferences in the future that we would like. Like, for instance, in Bangalore, FOSS India is an industry conference. We can't just go to Sun conferences. That's good, that's fine. Sun provides lots of venues for us to have community interactions. But the OpenSolaris community needs to go to industry conferences like FOSS India. And what was nice about that particular one, this is I guess in December of 2007, was that was my first trip to India, and I couldn't tell where the line was separating Sun, OpenSolaris people from community people. It blended completely. We had a whole day event of OpenSolaris talks, all technical. I spoke later on in the week, and just like now, the situation then was I was the only non-technical speaker there, which is becoming a pattern now, I think. But it was one talk after a full day of highly technical talks, all designed around how people get involved. I talked about community building, how to get involved from a community and governance perspective. They were talking about how to get involved from an engineering perspective. And it was powerful, and again, they were young, unlike me, and they mixed completely Sun and non-Sun, and that really, really moved me. And obviously the second event was, was this conference in Berlin. Now, I could have included images here from the OpenSolaris Summit in California a couple of months ago, because that too was a very good conference for mixing of community people and Sun people, and Sun designed the conference pretty much in the open, and it was on the lists and things. And there was a lot of good community interaction there, but Sun created it and funded it and things like that. So I just wanted to really sort of drive the point home that the Sun events are great, but we really ought to also think in terms of industry conferences. OpenSolaris people need to go to OSCON in Portland. They need to go to ApacheCon, all these conferences, and they are. But we need to just do it more in volume. And also, we need more of these conferences. We need developer conferences to start up in other areas, business conferences, and whatever. Because that's how we're going to get large volumes of people. And some of the user groups now on OpenSolaris are growing in scale that they could actually develop they could actually develop into the conferences of themselves, which is obviously what's happening here too. So.